Welcome to Canadian Innovators, the show that celebrates innovation, entrepreneurs, and the Canadian spirit. I'm Ves Sobot, sitting in for Jocelyn Bamford. Every week, we introduce a thought leader, tell their story, unpack the challenges of doing their craft, and explore ideas for job growth and prosperity. This week, we have someone who has spent most of his adult life dedicated to serving. He was an officer in the Canadian Army for 27 years, retiring as a lieutenant colonel. He was posted 19 times to operations in Germany, Egypt, the former Yugoslavia, the USA, and across Canada. Following his military service in 2000, he became part of what is now called the Alberta Emergency Management Agency. Following 9/11, he led the development and implementation of Alberta Crisis Management Counterterrorism Plan. He worked in the field of emergency management up until 2013, working in Canada and the United States with government and the private sector. If that wasn't enough, he has a bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering and is a graduate of both the Canadian Land Forces Command in Kingston and in Toronto. David Redman, thank you for joining us here on Canadian Innovators.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, we'd like to chat with you today, drawing on your experience in the military. You have a wealth of experience, especially when it comes to Europe, United States, and Canada. President Trump has been very vocal about the need for allies to do their part and invest in the military and NATO. What's your assessment of Canada's commitment to the military spending and what President Trump is saying today?
I believe President Trump has highlighted something that has been very apparent in Canada, at least for the past decade, and that's the area of national security as a whole. The Canadian Armed Forces is one critical element in national security, but we need to think about all of national security when we think about what our commitments are and what our sovereignty requires and what President Trump is really talking about. So we need to think about things like defense of our borders, our border security elements, our Canadian Coast Guard, our immigration services and how they link into the whole process, our intelligence services, our forward-looking intelligence services, as well as our police, our courts, and all the other elements that make up national security. And so I put it to you that in the past decade, we've watched as, for instance, our intelligence services have been ignored, that foreign interference in our country has not been taken seriously, even when it's been highlighted and pointed out, that our police services have been muted and throttled with protests that are marching in our streets, screaming for the death of all Jews, all Christians, and all Canadians. Direct threats to our national security as a whole. And I believe we need to step back, look at national security as a complete entity and look at all elements of national security and reinvest in our future and our sovereignty. I believe the Canadian Armed Forces, which is obviously broken, is the canary in the coal mine.
Well, many Canadians, I think, would agree with you, especially today when the spotlight is being shone on how we manage our borders and how we defend our country. Canada has always been known to be combat capable. Our soldiers are wonderfully competent. World War I, World War II, Korea, during the Cold War, most recently Afghanistan. It seems the political will is no longer there to continue the tradition. Why do you think this has occurred, and can we reverse this?
Well, absolutely we can reverse it. I think it's very important for Canadians to remember that, well, people constantly say we're not a military nation. We're a nation which has always stepped up to the challenge. Now, Canada doesn't start wars. Canada helps end wars, and in particular, punches way above our weight. If you look at areas like World War II, I always like to point out that on D-Day, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force from Canada were all present, and that there were 5 beaches on D-Day, 2 American, 2 British, and 1 Canadian. So a tiny country called Canada was there along with giants, holding one of 5 beaches, trying to defend democracy, and our Air Force in the air over those beaches, and our ships at sea shelling in to support our ground troops.
Wow.
We've got an extremely proud history.
You bring up a very good point. We can be proud, there's no question, and hopefully we can be proud in the future. We'll be right back.